Hello, I'm Dhanya Rajendran. Welcome to an event organized by the Committee to Protect Journalists in association with the News Minute, where we remember Gauri Lankesh and the impunity in journalist killings in India. My criticism of Hindutva politics and the caste system makes my critics brand me as a Hindu hater. But I consider it my constitutional duty to continue, in my own little way, the struggle of Basavanna and Dr. Ambedkar towards establishing an egalitarian society. This was Gauri Lankesh in her own words. A fearless journalist, editor, and activist, Gauri dedicated her life speaking truth to power and championing the voices of the marginalized. Her assassination in 2017 in Bengaluru did not silence her work. It transformed her into a symbol of dissent and the endless fight for a secular and fair India. Today we'll discuss about Gauri Lankesh's life, her legacy, and also how impunity is growing within India as far as harassment and killings of journalists go. Let me introduce the panel with me today. Rollo Romig, he is an American journalist and critic. He's particularly popular in South India for some of his articles on people and events in the region. He manages Solutions Insights Lab at the Solutions Journalism Network, and he's the author of the Pulitzer Prize finalist book, I'm on the Hit List, which chronicles the life and murder of Gauri Lankesh. Welcome, Rollo, to the event.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Next on the panel is Asha Devi. Asha Devi is a teacher. She's also the vice president of the Sivan BJP Mahila Morcha. Her husband, Rajdev Ranjan, was a journalist who was killed in Bihar. For many years, Asha had been fighting against the powerful people who she believed was behind the killing. She wanted the case to be fast-tracked. Today, she runs a trust in Rajdev Ranjan's name. Thank you, Asha, for joining us. Okay, and in the studio with me is activist, a very familiar face for people in Karnataka and Bengaluru, writer, and a very close friend of Gauri Lankesh, Mr. Shivsundar. And finally, I want to welcome Ben Lee. She's a regional director of the Asia Pacific of the Committee to Protect Journalists. She began her career at the award-winning independent Malaysian news website called Malaysia Kini before going on to work for AFP and the Thomson Reuters Foundation. She's reported from Asia for over 2 decades. Welcome to the event.
Thank you.
So I think first we will just talk about Gauri, her legacy, and what that symbolizes. I'll go to Rollo first. In your book, you have said that a lot of people that you met over the course of writing the book, they would often describe Gauri as a free-spirited, fair-minded, and fiercely person. In fact, your book, I would say, is not just a biography of Gauri, but it frames her work vis-a-vis what is unraveling in India, right? And how journalists are being treated. What are your own reflections on Gauri's journey?
She did have a really distinct journey as a person and a journalist. And that was one of the things that interested me the most in writing about her at book length. You know, all those qualities you described her as having, free-spirited, feisty, she always had them, you know, from when she was young. But her attitude towards journalism and her attitude towards using journalism to speak out about how she actually saw things really evolved over time. When she started as a journalist in her early years, she was a much more conventionally minded journalist with, conventional attitudes towards neutrality and that sort of thing. But over time, especially as she started writing in Kannada instead of English, her experiences as a journalist and increasingly as an activist really radicalized her and made her much more not just willing, but she insisted on speaking out on what she saw as the result of everything that she was learning. So she paid many, many prices for this. She was attacked in pretty much every way a journalist can be attacked. But she believed very strongly that once you've come to a conclusion as a result of your research, as a result of your reporting, it's very important to speak out and say what you really see. And yeah, and it's in a lot of ways mirrored my own kind of journey as a journalist. So I've actually found her example very, very inspiring in my own life.
So one word that Rollo used, Shivsundar, is that she paid the price, right? I mean, in the book itself, he chronicles how revenue-wise also she was hit very badly. It was very difficult to run the newspaper. You have seen her journey.
Yeah.
You have been with her. In fact, that very day,
Yeah.
you did speak to her in the morning.
Yeah, in the morning.
Yes. So tell us, how did you see her journey, her courage, and what she really stood for?
Yeah. I think her courage evolved organically. In fact, her evolution as a fearless journalist, an activist journalist with lot of commitment to the political ideology that she believed in, had an organic evolution. I met her in 2002. Then she was an adventurous woman in that sense. She was very, very assertive and all that. She had just returned from her very, very fancy English journalism that she pursued in Delhi, etc. But then once she started rooting herself in the Karnataka milieu, especially in its people's movement, I've seen in a very close quarters. In fact, my association with her both in activism and journalism continued from 2002 to 2017. I was writing a column to her till 2012. So her opening up to the new challenges and understanding with compassion, with empathy and sympathy, and that made her Gauri. In fact, I would take this opportunity to strongly recommend Rollo's book. In fact, that is not just about Gauri, that's about making of Gauri. Making of Gauri in the times that we live in. In fact, in that sense, I always say that the transformation of Gauri from a kind of journalist into a kind of activist journalism with very deep compassion to the people is a kind of hope. Is a kind of hope that this is a possibility. So I think that courage was very, very organic to her. It was not just self-imposed. It was not just purely ideological driven. Of course, it was very political. It was political and ideological. But that evolution was very organic because her persona itself actually was molded in that process. I can cite in the course a lot of the examples in which how she actually was before and was transformed into a new human being. I think that is the hope. In fact, I would say the struggles that she actually engaged herself in, which was very challenging, which was as she had to pay a lot of price.
Correct.
Especially the stand that she took on the question of Naxalism. In fact, she was actually one of the important person, along with Doreswamy and A.K. Subbaya, to negotiate with Naxalism. In fact, there was one great Naxal leader by name Saket Rajan. Incidentally, that person was senior to Gauri Lankesh in Delhi JNU actually. She realized it later. He was assassinated by the police in 2005. That was a great challenge. The whole prior to 3 days till after this murder of Saket Rajan, the whole Kannada press was very sympathetic because that was a brutal murder. But later on, Naxalites took revenge in some remote place in Pavgada, and the whole situation became very topsy-turvy. But she continued with whatever conviction she had about the causes that they pursued. She did not actually compromise. These are some moments of crisis, it is the crisis that defines one personality. We can say a lot of things, but when there is a personal crisis, because the stand that she took, that Naxalites have a very, very genuine demands, but their path is wrong. But just because of one incident, you cannot just do away with their demands. But for that, her brother was the editor and she was thrown away from her own. We did not know that he was the owner. We thought she is the owner and editor. Then only we realized that he was just an editor, paid editor in a institution that was built by her father. So she didn't actually deter. I was told that there was a commercial digital media had given her a lot of opportunities to come back. She would have been in a 6-digit margin of salary by that time. But she was stubborn, she was adamant, and she said that I will continue with this. And that's how the new Gauri Lankesh Patrika came up. So these are the moments how she actually, her adventurous and committed persona, her political ideology, and her own self, that evolved. That brought her, gave a lot of courage.
For those unaware, Gauri was part of discussions held between the Karnataka government then and Naxalites to bring them back into mainstream. She was part of the negotiations.
Yeah.
In fact, it is kind of ironical, right? That this year,
Yeah.
the Karnataka government said that we are Naxal free. And Gauri did play a role in that entire path of making Naxals come to the mainstream. I want to go to I need to go to Bay now. I want to ask you, India is ranked 151 in the World Press Freedom Index. And even this year, RSF says that it is one of the most dangerous countries for journalists to work in. Does How does CPJ look at Gauri's killing? That too in a city like Bengaluru. For example, in Rollo's book, there are so many people who keep reminding that this happening in a city like Bengaluru came as a huge shock. That we do believe that journalists can be killed, perhaps elsewhere, but not here. So, do you believe that Gauri's killing is also emblematic of the impunity in India?
Definitely. It is emblematic of the issues of impunity in India. It is emblematic because it's not an isolated case. It represents a pattern where the perpetrators get away from murder without any form of punishment, a pattern where we see a vicious cycle of violence was allowed to take place again and again with impunity. So killing a journalist has become one of the world's safest crime. That happened in places which are ruled by authoritarian regime, but also in places where we consider democracies like India. And Gauri Lankesh killing was one of them. And as you say at the start, 8 years after her murder, not a single person has been convicted. So we have to remember this was a very brazen attack where she was shot and killed outside her home as she returned from work. But all the 17 accused are all out on bail right now. So as you say at the start, that she was called a Hindu hater. She was known for her critical journalism. Her work was very critical of the right-wing extremisms and the establishment. And her newspaper also covered issues like the communal violence and the caste system. So her case again, is very emblematic because it represents the kind of pattern that we are seeing again and again, the type of violence and threats against journalists that was condoned and not stopped, not prevented. The pattern where murderers of journalists get away scot-free, the pace of justice, which is moving very, very slowly, and the lack of political will when it comes to holding the perpetrators fully accountable.
ठीक है. I'll just go to Asha now. Asha ji, आपने she's not okay. I think we'll have to wait for Asha ji to come back. I wanted to ask the question about the mastermind in the killing of Rajdev Ranjan was just acquitted by the court. So we'll ask her about that when she is back online. I'll go back to Rollo now. You have studied all the charge sheets. The trial has been going on for a long time. Everyone who has been accused in the murder of Gauri Lankesh has gotten bail now. And there is a lot of discussion again that they have gotten bail, but other political prisoners haven't gotten. Yesterday, we saw a judgment by the Delhi High Court where a few of the political activists who have been jailed, accused of actually engineering the Delhi riots, did not get bail. So there's a lot of talk about that. So I wanted to address one thing. You have watched the trial. You've also looked at the charge sheet. I recently read an interview of yours where you talked about how the Sanatan Sanstha itself does not feature as an organization in the charge sheet. They are not named in the charge sheet per se. And the way the case has been going on, how do you perceive this entire process?
Well, yeah, the trial's been going on for over 3 years. Most of the arrests were made. There are 17 men who've been arrested for conspiring to kill Gauri. Most of them were arrested 7 years ago. So it's been quite a long time. It's unfortunately not unusual in the Indian justice system. But I think the important thing to note is that there are so many different ways to delay and derail a trial that look perfectly legitimate. that look like the system as it's supposed to work. And the lawyers for the accused in Gauri's case are very talented at employing all of these techniques for delaying the trial. And, the government doesn't want to make the appearance of interfering with the trial, but they don't need to. They can be very subtle about slow walking the trial. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago now, several years ago, there was this attempt to remove some of the charges from the accused. They'd been charged under Karnataka State's organized crime law, which is one of the things that made it possible to try them all together, all 17 men. And if these charges were stripped from them, it would massively undermine the trial. It would mean that they would probably all have to be tried individually. It would be much, much more delayed even than it is already. And there was a deadline where the state government, which at that time was a BJP government, had to simply file its own case against removing the charges, and they completely missed the deadline. And it's such a bureaucratic way of slowing things down. They didn't have to come out overtly and shut down the trial. They could simply fail to file some paperwork. And even the explanation I gave just now is such a boring explanation, right? It requires all these, explaining all these details. I felt bored explaining it, and that's deliberate. They want the explanations for why things are slow to be very boring and bureaucratic. And so it's not convincing, it's difficult to talk about, but then the end result is that the trial is much slower. And there's so many examples of this all along the way. So there's so many ways that you could point to the process in Gauri's case, the police process, the judicial process, and say, this is the system as it's supposed to be working. It's working in her case. It's just very slow. But the system is fundamentally broken. And the system working as it's supposed to work does not result in justice.
Is Asha back? Okay. Asha ji, आप मुझे सुन सकते हो?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you have spoken of a hit list, which was maintained by the MP Shahabuddin. You've spoken many times about it, and आपने ये hit list के बारे में बहुत बार बात की है, और आपने अभी देखा कि रिहा भी कर दिया है ये जो मास्टरमाइंड है इस किलिंग में. तो आपका क्या एक्सपीरियंस रहा है ये जुडिशियल प्रोसेस नेविगेट करने में? कितना डिफिकल्ट था ये आपके लिए?
मेरे लिए डिफिकल्ट तो बहुत था, और मैंने ज़्यादा ट्रस्ट करके मैंने सीबीआई जैसी जांच एजेंसी को मैंने ये केस सौंपा था कि मुझे पूरी तरह से न्याय मिल पाएगा. लेकिन अभी जो 30 अगस्त को जो अदालत का जो फैसला आया, उसमें 3 लोगों को कल्प्रेट ठहराया गया और 3 लोगों को बरी किया गया, तो ये मेरे लिए बहुत ही अफसोसजनक बात है.
तो आप थोड़ा एक्सप्लेन कर सकते हैं कि इतने सालों में क्या हुआ, कितना डिफिकल्ट था ये जुडिशियल प्रोसेस फॉलो करने में, और जो लोग आप जो समझते हैं कि जो लोग इन्वॉल्व है इस मर्डर में, उनको इस केस में नेम करने के लिए भी आप बहुत डिफिकल्टी था ना?
यस मैम. सबसे पहले तो हमारे यहाँ की सिवान की लोकल पुलिस ने ही इसकी कुछ इंक्वायरी वगैरह की थी, जिसमें कि जो जितने भी शूटर वगैरह थे और उनको हेल्प करने वाले जितने भी लोग थे, सभी को अरेस्ट किया गया था, उनके लोकेशन ट्रेस करके. उसके बाद से फिर सीबीआई तक पहुंचने के लिए मुझे बहुत मुशक्कत करनी पड़ी, बहुत मेहनत करनी पड़ी. इसके लिए मुझे दिल्ली तक जाना पड़ा, और उस समय होम मिनिस्टर श्री राजनाथ सिंह जी थे, तो उनसे मैं जाकर के मिली और उनसे मुझे रिक्वेस्ट करनी पड़ी कि मेरा केस सीबीआई को सौंपा जाए, क्योंकि मुझे बिहार की लोकल पुलिस पर मुझे ट्रस्ट नहीं है, और इसलिए फिर मुझे दिल्ली तक जाना पड़ा, और फिर ये केस सीबीआई को दिया गया. लेकिन सीबीआई को देने के बाद भी मुझे काफी मुश्किल का सामना करना पड़ा. इसकी इन्वेस्टिगेशन के तहत मुझे बहुत ही एहतियात बरतनी पड़ी और फिर सिवान से लेकर के मुजफ्फरपुर कोर्ट तक, अदालत तक मुझे जाने आने में, और फिर इस केस की इन्वेस्टिगेशन में जो भी बातें जो सामने आई और जिन लोगों का नाम आया, फिर उसके बाद मुझे और ज्यादा इसमें दिक्कत का सामना करना पड़ा, क्योंकि एक तो डर भी था कहीं ना कहीं कि मैं सीबीआई के पास जा रही हूँ और मैंने एफआईआर वगैरह कराई है, तो काफी मुझे, मेरे लिए और मेरे पूरे परिवार के लिए एक डर का माहौल था उस समय कि कहीं फिर नेक्स्ट घटना भी ना कोई घट जाए मेरे परिवार के साथ।
Small audio problem.
और
We'll
फिर
go back to we'll go back to. But Shivsundar, I want to ask you, what is the kind of social and political protection that these people get? Because it is not just Gauri's killing, right? We have seen Pansare, Dhabolkar, and Kalburgi killings. What is the kind of in fact, I asked Rollo also the same thing. The Sanatan Sanstha is not even implicated in many of these cases. In any of these cases, actually.
That particular thing has a legal explanation because you cannot prove the institutional participation in the killing.
Correct.
All the 17 are directly or indirectly inspired by the Sanatan Samstha's ideology and philosophy. That can be proved because the charge sheet says that in all their dens, they could get Sanatan Prabhat and Kshatra Dharma Sadhana. These two are the important their publications which gives an ideological program. See, in this whole journalist murders, you can make two patterns. One is for the revenge. There is a anti-corruption, RTI. These things are revolving around a particular person or a power holder. These are the Gauri, Kalburgi and Pansare kind of thing is a ideologically motivated, a political project. It is a political assassination. When there is a political assassination, there is a political justification to that. There is a whole ecosystem which actually completely endorses this kind of killing. Of course, for the namesake, they would say that no, killing is not the answer, but then what should we do? These are the things, In fact, immediately after the killing of Gauri, just 1 hour later, there was a Twitter made by a very notorious editor of a Kannada newspaper by name, I can take his name, Vishweshwar, but he said that if Gauri had not killed by this Gundu, in Kannada Gundu means two things. Gundu is one liquor, another Gundu is the bullet. If Gauri was not killed by this bullet, this Gundu, she would have killed by that bullet. She's a drunkard and she would have been killed. This is the way these people actually, even after assassination, without any remorse, they wanted to justify it. They wanted to normalize it. And day in and day out, most of the newspapers actually brought in such kind of stories to it is victim blaming kind of thing. She's a woman. She is a kind of self-assertive woman. Suggesting that she was a smoker. So that kind of propaganda went against this ideological propaganda. She was a woman and she was anti-communal and all this, anti-Hindutva in that sense, and pro-Adivasis. So this
pro-Naxal,
pro-Naxal in the sense, not in the sense that is defined, that she did not endorse the strategy that they actually
no, but I'm saying for a long time people thought that she was killed because of that, right?
Yeah. But that was not, in fact, that was one angle that the society probed into also. They said that there was no reason to probe further into that. So that makes the difference. That provides a social justification, that provides a political justification, and people say that, oh, why she was not expected to do all these things. So that gives a kind of normalcy to these kind of killings. And of course, even though they're all the four, in fact, the 18 accused, 5 to 6 of them are common factors in all the 4 other murders also, right from Pansare to Dabolkar to Kalburgi in these people. But then again, institutionally, you cannot implicate them. That is the problem. Yeah.
I'll just come to, I just want to add one point. After Gauri was shot dead, I, as a woman journalist myself, I was so shocked at the kind of reactions. And I remember discussing in the newsroom that anybody's murder tomorrow, there will be 100 people to justify any kind of murder, right? Especially that of a journalist, there'll be people to celebrate. It was actually a rude wake-up call, I felt. Coming to Bailey, can you tell us what does CPJ's data and advocacy reveal about the impunity that people enjoy in India, and also what are the global trends?
Yeah, certainly. India, according to our data, has been one of the worst offenders when it comes to impunity, which means the journalists, the killers of journalists, go free. So according to our data, 61 journalists in India have been murdered since 1992 in direct retaliation for their work. That's according to our CCTV data since 1992 when we began to collect data. And we are also investigating another 30 killings in India, where we are looking into the motive behind this killing. And I want to stress that a vast majority of this case remains unsolved, meaning no one has been convicted, or there has only been partial convictions. And killing a journalist, as I say just now, that has become one of the world's safest crime because impunity remains entrenched. And last year, as many of you know, was the deadliest year for journalists in our CPJ record because of the ongoing Israel-Gaza war. But what's really striking here, and this comes back and very relevant to Gauri's case, is that the issues of impunity globally. We are looking at a pattern where no one is held to account in almost 80% of the cases where journalists have been murdered because of their work. So again, this is why we are stressing that there needs to be full accountability. There needs to be full justice, because the issues where impunity persists is driving up all the threats for journalists, and by extensions, a threat to us as public, our right to information, our right to know.
I just want to ask a follow-up question. You said that 80% of cases across the globe, people are not held responsible if they kill journalists. Why do you think that's the global trend?
Again, I think, it comes back to a mix of factors that contribute to that. The very weak investigations, the lack of political view, and in some cases where there's also state and non-state actors which were involved in killing of the journalists. So I think, again, this is what we are seeing in Gauri's case as well, is that although the suspect were brought to trial, but as Rollo mentioned just now, it's been so slow that some paperwork is not done. People are losing interest after 8 years. The fact that people don't really know what happened. So it's again up to us to keep speaking up about these cases, to keep reminding people about Gauri's work, about the danger that journalists are facing for reporting the truth and reporting the facts here.
Yeah. You want to say something? Yes.
No, not about this. Gauri's trial, there is one peculiar thing I wanted to bring to your notice. See, till 2022, she was killed in 2017. The charge sheet was filed in 2018. On the part of the executive and the prosecution, there is not a big problem. But between 2018 and 2022, there was a delay by the government itself. Then it was a BJP government. But 2022, the trial started. Then it became the responsibility of the judiciary. We see the judicial non-cooperation here completely. After that, once the charge sheet is filed, when the public prosecutor is the same.
What do you mean by judicial non-cooperation?
See, first thing, they are allotting only 3 days in a week. 3 days in a month, or at the maximum 5 days in a month. They have actually allotted a judge who is also having administrative responsibility. Is the principal judge. There is some nomenclature to that particular judge who cannot manage. It is personally impossible. They could have allotted a separate judge for that matter. Then there has been this long pending demand for a speedy trial and a special court. In fact, after Siddaramaiah government came to power, they actually, as a complaint, Kavita Lankesh, sister of Gauri Lankesh, made a representation, and that was duly forwarded to judiciary. Then the judiciary have responded, and the law minister have shown it is duty bound to show it to the complainant Kavita Lankesh, where judiciary says that it is not possible to give a speedy trial and constitute a special court. So that's what I say is the judicial non-cooperation. Now what is left? We are left with, we have to go with this court. Even the judge, there is already 6 judges who have already been transferred. there will be 6 more, or we don't know how much. Then you will give at the maximum 5 to 7 days. So the prosecutor tells that at least in a month we can try only 2 or 3 witnesses. In fact, there were 520 witnesses who are to be tried. Because he insisted that there should be a speedy trial, he has said that he will not try some 150 witnesses or so. Still some 100 witnesses are to be tried. If this is the pace, because of the judicial non-cooperation, it is not because of the government here in this case. So this will go on. And why judicial non-cooperation? That's a lot. When you see the judgments that we got yesterday in the Umar case, etc., there are some ideological, political reasons also, because there are speedy courts, there are special courts.
No, in fact, something which Lee said, that when this process takes so long, people tend to forget, and that's not just for people, right? Even for journalists like us to keep track of what is happening in the court monthly basis, it has become very difficult. I mean, every time we have to call the prosecutor and ask, what is the update? Rollo, coming to you, you have spoken about the murders of Dabholkar, Pansare, and Kalburgi in the book. And of course, there has been a lot of coverage on these killings also. What did you find about what is it that binds together all these killings? The ideological project, if I can call it so, behind all this?
Yeah, sure. Well, as Shivsundar noted, there's a through line of perpetrators where many of the same men were clearly involved in all 4 of these murders. So all 4 were writers, and all 4 were very critical of the government, and all 4 had been outspoken on their views on religion also. And in my view, what seems to be the pattern, the commonality in those 4 cases, is that the killers wanted to narrowly restrict what's possible to say about Hinduism, and to define a line where if you cross this line, there will be violence against you. And, Hinduism is one of the world's richest, most diverse, most multifarious wisdom traditions. These men don't want a diverse and multifarious Hinduism. They want a very narrowly defined Hinduism that will serve their political interests. They may present themselves as religious seekers, but their project is political, and they want a Hinduism that will serve their political idea of a Hindu nation, of a Hindu Rashtra. They want Hindus to come together in a monolithic common cause, primarily against Indian Muslims. That is their goal. And when Hinduism is too diverse, in their view, that undermines this goal of really, religious civil war in India. And all 4 of the people they killed, they saw as crossing a line that they didn't want to cross. They didn't want people to cross, and they wanted to give an example to others. These are the things you're not allowed to say anymore. And that in my view, I think the evidence is pretty ample from the statements that the accused made and everything they left behind, and even the publications of Sanatan Sanstha, which all these men were associated with in one way or another, give a pretty clear path of the motivations here.
Adding to that, to complement that theory, it is not just the 4 people who were killed. There are 22 people in the list who are to be killed. Like, for example, the first ever arrest was made when they were hatching a conspiracy to kill one rationalist by name Bhagwan. And there was Narendra Naik, another rationalist, and there were Kolse Patil from Maharashtra. There were 22 of them. All actually fall into the same line of what in the Kshatriya Dharma Sadhana is called as Durjanas. Durjanas are those who are Hindus but critic of Hindutva. So that is the commonality.
Now, I remember one criticism that people were invoking at that time is that Gauri used to write really critical things, very harsh things in her newspaper. So that's in the book also, Rollo, there are a couple of people who tell you, right, that look, she was very harsh, not like usual critique of the right wing. Almost uses an excuse that then it's okay, right?
Well, I think Gauri would have answered to say, I only seem harsh because everyone else is speaking so softly, because there are so few people willing to speak in a forthright way. And look, she was definitely very outspoken. She said things bluntly, but it's an easy excuse among those who are willing to be violent that that writers and thinkers should speak more softly. The implication is simply that a journalist is getting their just desserts if they are too bold.
There is another angle actually. Parshuram Wagmare, the shooter, he did not know about Gauri Lankesh Patrike. Amul Kale, the mastermind, could not read Kannada. None of the 17 people, I think that they would have never read Lankesh Patrike. But it is the kind of ideological training, and they had shown a small piece of video.
Yes, a YouTube
clip which was taken from the context and which portrayed her as a Hindu baiter. But that was not the case. If you read the whole thing, if you listen to that would have been different. So that made them actually.
आशा जी, मैं अभी आपसे पूछती हूँ कि is she there? Okay, I think there is a small connection problem with her. We'll just see if she comes back. No, okay. She isn't back. So I'll come to you, Lee. We spoke about the impunity, which you explained is not just an Indian phenomenon, but it's all across the globe too. But looking at Asia as a region, and India in particular, why do you think the risk for journalists is actually going up?
There is a number of factors, I think. Our research has shown journalists who cover issues like crime, corruptions, and conflict. The 3 Cs, as I always say, are very vulnerable, are basically the ones who were murdered in direct retaliations of their work. And I think a common pattern where we are seeing here is also journalists who have very often received threats prior to their killings. That is something that we see very often in our research and documentations work, or those who have been harassed online as well. So online harassment, as we say, always lead to kind of a real life risk for journalists. And as you say just now, Dhanya, that when Gauri was murdered, you were very shocked that they have been many excuses and reasons were given about why the perpetrators are not being brought to account. So I think what we have are saying is that when this kind of violence is normalized, then journalists are at higher risk of being targeted. So what CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, we have been around for more than 40 years. We have been doing this work for a long time, and what we have been advocating very strongly to governments and different government agencies is that the governments must take a strong actions and strong stand to condemn this kind of killing quickly and forcefully when journalists are being targeted, because if that is not done, it sends a message to the perpetrators that they can get away with impunity. So and not just that, to take actions to end impunity, but we are also advocating, especially also in the case of India, that we have been working very closely with different stakeholders to promote the idea of media safety. We are advocating to newsroom to put in place mechanisms to protect their journalists, to raise awareness about what newsroom journalists, managers in the newsroom can do to put in place some kind of preventative actions, to make sure that journalists can be safe. But I think the onus here, the responsibility here is also on the governments, federal or state governments, to put in place strong mechanisms to protect journalists, to advocate the idea of safety, but also when things like what we're seeing here, a killing has happened, that is a worse form of censorship. In whatever case, it's a worse form of censorship. When it happens, the prosecution must happen. It must take place, a conviction.
I think you are being very, very optimistic, saying that governments should condemn. In fact, these days when a journalist is harassed, physically attacked, or let's say even killed, all that I'm hoping for is that government, whether it's a union government or various state governments, don't just go out and encourage that kind of harassment. I think asking them to condemn is become a process that I don't think we in India think it's realistic anymore, right? Because most times political parties, especially the one at the center, is encouraging of this kind of violence. So I want to come to you, Rollo. You have spoken about how democracies can fall, and that's not through war or coup or internal coup or tanks, but it is through silencing, it is through fear. And this is not a phenomenon that we are seeing just in India. You live in the US. Can you, for our audience, also compare sort of what is happening there to what is unfolding in India?
Sure, and I'll just say a word about the attitude towards the current government about violence towards journalists. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has never spoken the name Gauri Lankesh, no matter how famous and widely discussed her case has become. And when right-wing figures are asked why has the prime minister never spoken her name, they take it as an opportunity to insult her. There was one man who said, why should the prime minister cry every time a dog is killed? This kind of thing. So it becomes an opportunity actually to insult the dead. Back to your question though about the parallels, there's certainly a playbook, this authoritarian playbook that we see carried out very directly. It's been kind of uncanny for me. I wrote this book about, my book is about Gauri Lankesh's assassination, but it's really also a history of the rise of the right wing in India in the 21st century through her story. And there's this very direct playbook that the BJP has followed, that the RSS has followed, that they've been building on. It's been a very long game. They've been building this game for a century. And you can really see as autocracy becomes this primary mode of government all over the world, you can see government after government following the same playbook. And that Trump has learned directly or indirectly from the Indian model. Before Trump was elected, they published their playbook. It was called Project 2025. It was out there for everyone to see. He made a weak protestation saying, this is not my program. This is not my project. And as we've seen over the last 8 months, they've gone through the whole thing systematically. It very much is a direct program. And so there was a lost opportunity there for us to think ahead. Again, these groups are playing a very long game. They telegraph what they want to do long in advance. They are resurrecting this old 20th century fascist program. We know the program backwards and forwards. If we just study what they say, study what they have done, study how it's been done in other countries, we can actually anticipate a lot better than we have been doing what these autocratic and authoritarian governments have in mind and what they plan to do, and safeguard some of the institutions that need protecting in advance. And we have not done that. It's something that we need to wake up to. That's way overdue.
So, Shivsundar, Rollo talks about how the playbook is being studied by different governments, autocrats, right? So if there's a playbook which civil society, which people who want democratic values to be upheld, what do you think that should be? How can civil society really step in?
I think Gauri's life has a lot of directions in that manner. In fact, if you are a journalist, part of the civil society, you may seek the truth, be courageous to propose it, be an activist journalism. I think that's what is needed today. You cannot be sitting on the fence. You cannot just say that somebody has reported that it is raining. Somebody said that there is no raining. Open the window and find out for yourself whether it is raining. And if you are courageous enough, we should be courageous. Go there and find out who are all drenching in the rain and for what purpose. I think that is if you are a journalist. I think seeking the truth and asking the questions is a very, very important question. Ask question to the state, and that has gone. In fact, investigative journalism asking questions to the power that be has gone completely. But that was a virtue that was celebrated long before. I think that has to be brought in. We should ask questions. We should actually build models. This is possible. In fact, Gauri actually teaches me, gives me a hope always, because that is a hope. That is a possibility. A woman like Gauri became a Gauri, the Gauri. So that possibility, that transformation, I think we all should pass through. Civil society, I think, as Rollo conceptualized it, it is fascism. Let us be very clear. Fascism is not like any authoritarian role. Fascism has a social base. Fascism ideologically indoctrinates its subjects. So you need to fight that war each day, each hour, because now this WhatsApp university is there and they actually contaminate all your thinking, and it's a post-truth society also. So not only fact is not enough. If you give facts and the statistics, they would say, oh, so what? Our Modi is doing good thing. If Modi has made all that corruption, vote chori, so what? It is to defend India. But then gaining the confidence of the people is a biggest question for the civil society. You cannot be away from the people, from the political
No,
society.
but the question is, how can civil society also help in protecting those journalists, right?
Yeah.
We do have people who
Yeah.
still speak truth to power.
Yeah.
How can that happen? Because the
I think
discrediting of media is a worldwide phenomenon.
exactly. I think whenever the media as a organization, or the journalist as an individual are in the great distress, I think civil society should come to their help. At present, we are facing this great challenge of actually surveillance of all this. And we, yourself and myself, are also facing the question in this Dharmasala context, etc. I think there should be a civil society initiative to protect this whole institution as an independent media. I mean, when there is an attack on a particular journalist, civil society should get up and protect them in all possible ways, giving moral, ethical help, giving financial help, giving legal help. I think that vibrant civil society is very much necessary. That vibrant civil society can only be constituted with Gauri actually tried by becoming model. I think that is required.
आशा जी, आप अभी वापस आए हो तो मैं आपसे सवाल पूछती हूँ, क्या आपको ये लगता है कि आपके पति को इसलिए टारगेट किया गया क्योंकि उन्होंने पावर स्ट्रक्चर्स को चुनौती दी थी, पावर स्ट्रक्चर्स के बारे में वो सवाल पूछते थे?
जी मैम, बिल्कुल। हेलो
सुन सकते हैं, आप बोलिए।
हेलो हेलो मैम, क्या आप मुझे सुन पा रही हैं?
हाँ, हम सुन सकते हैं, आप बोलिए।
मैम, मुझे आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही है, मैं नहीं सुन पा रही हूँ आपको।
ठीक है. Okay, I think there's still some connectivity issue, so maybe we could at least record something with her later and put. I'll just go to Lee again. Lee, we did speak about global trends and about how there is similarity between what is happening in India and other countries. But if we stick to India and Asian countries, why do you think there's a lack of accountability? And we are a very vast country. Like sometimes people ask us, like people ask me, for example, why is India so low on the press freedom index? How can we be together with so many other countries which see much more killings of journalists, etc.? And I sometimes believe that's also because of the scale, right? We're such a large country with so many media houses spread across states, and there are all kinds of harassment of journalists. But why do you believe that accountability is so low when it comes to harassment and killing?
Yeah, well, exactly as you say, I think of course, India is the world most populated country, and that, presents in itself, the problems when it comes to tackling these issues. But definitely it can be done. And I want to respond to your earlier questions, your remark that, yeah, indeed, I'm quite optimistic sometimes. Why I have to remain optimistic, when, you say, India we are lucky as long as the government doesn't encourage this or spreading misinformation against journalists. But I think India is the world's largest democracy, so it really has an outsized influence. Whatever India does, other countries are watching, and I think India wants to present itself as a leader of the global south, a leader as a world's largest democracy. It really can set a really strong example when it comes to protecting journalists, when it comes to upholding press freedom, because if you want to live up your, the country's reputation as the world's largest democracy, those are the certain, basic criteria that we are looking at. But unfortunately, yes, at the moment, India, when we are looking at accountability, the issues of accountability that you're asking, when it comes to the murder of journalists, India has been one of the worst offenders. And when we are looking at the patterns and statistics, what it tells us is also that if anyone is held accountable, it's usually the gunman, the hired gunman, or the hit squad, the mastermind, almost never being brought to justice. So this is very much in line with the regional and global trend that we are seeing. So Asha is here. Of course, I think just over the weekend, we saw a ruling in the killing of the Rajdev Ranjan's case after 9 years, where 3 men, including the shooter, were convicted. But 3 others were acquitted at the same time, including the suspected mastermind. So again, this is where we call on, the governments, in this case, the Indian authority, to really prosecute all those who are responsible for the killing of a journalist. But again, this is where, I wanted to sound an optimistic note, because I wanted to emphasize that justice is possible when there is political will and when we advocate for it. I wanted to give you an examples of the Philippines, which is also one of the world's most dangerous country to work as a journalist. And there was a case of a radio journalist whose name is Jerry Ortega. He was a radio journalist known for exposing corruption. He was murdered in his home province in 2011. The gunman who was paid like nearly $200 was sentenced to life very quickly. But the mastermind, the suspected mastermind, was on the run for a very, very long time. And he was in hiding. He was on the run. He was a very powerful former governor on the island itself. But last year, he turned himself in. He surrendered to police after CPJ and our other partners, advocating and persistently investigating his case, looking into new leads and campaigned on a full justice for Jerry Ortega's family. So now the suspected mastermind is in police custody, is on trial after 14 years. So although we are not there yet, but the prospect of justice is closer than ever for the family. So again, I really want to emphasize the fact that until the real mastermind is brought to justice, the killing of journalists will continue to create a chilling effect on the wider media industry that includes, you and I here, who care very much about this profession.
Yeah, justice is possible when political will is there, Lee says. And I do agree with that. And that is the reason why we have to keep asking for that political will. Rollo, we'll wrap up the conversation with one last round of questions to everyone. What I want to ask you, there are really 2 parts to it. One is that while writing this book, and of course, during your travels in India, you've spoken to a lot of journalists. What do you think is their sense of vulnerability? How vulnerable do most people feel, especially those who are doing political reporting? And the second is, do you believe that the book, that the life of Gauri Lankesh and the conversations around it will protect the voice of dissenters? It's to let people know that this is happening and that this has to be protected.
Yeah, my sense in talking to many, many journalists in India is that there's a very strong sense of vulnerability. And not just journalists, but, writers and thinkers in general. I've had many people tell me uh, outrightly that these murders have made them think twice about speaking up, have made them pull back from making television appearances, have made them more careful about what they say. So this chilling effect is very real. It's made me all the more incredibly impressed by the bravery of so many journalists who've nonetheless continued doing the work. I can't blame anyone for pulling back. It's genuinely terrifying, especially if your name appears on one of these lists. The danger is very real. So I certainly wouldn't blame anyone for pulling back. But I'm incredibly impressed by how brave, working Indian journalists are, with low compensation, constant hate, constant insults, and then court cases against you at every turn, and then the very real threat of violence. It's actually amazing what Indian journalists have continued to produce under these circumstances. It's really inspiring. And I think Gauri's story, it illustrates a lot of things, but one thing I think that it illustrates is the inadequacy of the current solution for journalist safety in India. And typically now, if a journalist is under sufficient threat, they are offered police protection, which means an armed policeman or multiple armed policemen follow you around wherever you go. And Gauri was offered this at one point. She understandably found it completely unacceptable. She said, "I can't go around as a journalist interviewing people and have a policeman following me everywhere. It just doesn't make any sense." She couldn't think of doing her job that way. And furthermore, she has to write about the police. She has to write critically about the police. How can she do that effectively when she's got a policeman following her around at all times? And I'm seeing this in action. K.S. Bhagwan is who, as Shivsundar noted, was the next person on the list who they planned to kill, did have police protection. And, he never goes anywhere without a policeman at his side. At his house, there's two policemen, like with a sniper's nest set up, waiting to protect him. That's an extreme limitation on your freedom of movement, on your privacy. And in general, we just rely too much on the police to do tasks that could be done by many other people. The police are the armed force of the state. If we're lucky, they're working in our interest, but their primary interest is in supporting whatever the state wants. And I think that there's an opportunity here to come up with imaginative new systems for protecting journalists, for looking out for journalists, for guarding journalists that don't rely on the police. Because for many journalists, that's just an unacceptable answer.
Thank you for that. I want to just ask Shivsundar, again, two small parts. One is the chilling effect that Rollo spoke about. Do you see that growing amongst writers, activists, thinkers? Today morning, I got a call from a very worried NGO person who said that their name has appeared for some probe where they had nothing to do with the issue. So is the chilling effect growing? And as Gauri's friend, what would you want young journalists to take away from her life?
Yeah, the first part, chilling effect is, of course, there. There are two parts. One is the police threat. The other is the social threat. In fact, that is what is fascism all about. You have social organization someday, and there is campaign, trolling, these kind of things, that actually intimidates journalists. That is there. But in spite of that, I think I should say, at least in Kannada journalism, Kannada media world, there are many brave journalists, syndicated kind of enterprises are there, and individual journalists. They are taking bravery, and they are all inspired by, to an extent, by Gauri Lankesh also. I think that's what I would say to the young journalist also. Seek truth, ask questions, open the windows and find out what is the truth. I think that is very much necessary, not just to protect journalism. Journalism is a reflection, it is a mirror. So to protect the society that we live in today, that is When fascism is talked about, it is about degeneration of the democratic institutions and degeneration of democratic value systems. And that percolates, that molecular permeability, even to the last man or woman. That is to be a constant protest against that and build alternate values. That fight should continue on.
Is there any example from Gauri's life that you can think of where she was under tremendous pressure, but then she would just go on?
One situation I can just remember, when there was this one encounter, she went on a fact finding, and she was already known for her pro-Naxal image, etc. And her car, where there were many teammates, for fact finding, that was surrounded by very, very ferocious right wingers. And that video is there. She was not deterred at all. She was very calm, composed, and she was reasoning with them. I am not actually protecting the strategies, but they are raising this question. See, there is an Adivasi. Should he not be protected of entering into the forest, etc.? And slowly they were just kept quiet. The other incident is she was invited to speak in Kannada Sahitya Sammelana. There is one annual event that is organized, quasi-government organization, Kannada Sahitya Parishad organizes that. And she was to talk about Kannada Sahitya, that is literature and progressiveness. And there was a big protest against Gauri Lankesh by organized protest. That was the BJP government, and a progressive writer was heading that. And she spoke. She was not a good speaker, by the way. She could not speak for continuously 10 minutes, but she spoke for 20 minutes relentlessly, stating her facts and explaining the differences between supporting the Naxalite strategy, supporting the Adivasi rights. And she would say that even if you still want to call me an Naxalite, Basavanna is an Naxalite, she said. And she ended. Such a composed she was. I think a lot of examples I can.
No, when you're talking about Gauri and the car example, I was thinking of what Rollo wrote, that other than fearless and all that, people also used to call her frail because of how she looked, right? So I was just thinking of that image of Gauri really sitting in that car and fighting and trying to talk to those people. Lee, if I can come to you, you did speak about what you believe the government should do when there are cases of harassment against journalists, etc. But what would you say are immediate, urgent steps the government should take? And I want to just bring in one point here. Being the chairperson of DigiPub, which is an association for digital media, I believe one step the government of India must take immediately is to not bring in laws which will actually deter freedom of speech and freedom of the media, which is what I think one big challenge for us is. But as far as CPJ's perspective goes, Lee, what do you think should be done, and particularly in Gauri's case?
Yeah, no, I agree with you that government, of course, must not introduce any sort of legislations that will deter freedom of speech and the way that journalists can work freely and safely. In Gauri's case, in particular, we believe a fast track courts or other sort of dedicated mechanisms are critical from a press freedom perspective. The most urgent step here for India is to break this kind of culture of impunity and to ensure there is timely justice. Because right now, as we heard from other panelists as well, that the trial are moving at a very slow pace. The cases drag on for years. This kind of foot dragging must stop immediately. The accused walk free, not because they are innocent, but because the system failed. So this is a pattern that we must break away immediately. And this is a pattern that we are seeing again and again for many years. It sends, again, the kind of chilling effect toward a wider media community, because it shows that killing a journalist may not come with any consequences. So, but again, as I spoke about India as the world's largest democracy, that we must understand that being a democracy is not just about holding elections. It has a number of domestic and international obligations that include, for instance, India is a party to the international treaty, ICCPR, which includes, upholding rights to life, upholding freedom of expression. And, so when the government fails to prosecute or convict someone in Gauri's a murder 8 years ago, this is not just a domestic failure, but it's also a potential breach of India's international obligation. So, yes, I think, in Gauri's case, we advocate for the idea of a fast track court and no journalist should pay the price for doing their work.
Okay, so I'm going to end this whole talk with one thought from each of you. I mean, we can have multiple events where we really talk about what's going wrong, but no program should end without some solution that we all have in our minds, right? So first I'll come to Rollo. One, what do you think Gauri's memory means today? And what is one action that you can recommend to really fight impunity? And the same question to Shivsundar and Lee. Rollo?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that Gauri's life illustrates so vividly is that her work, her life, her sense of purpose became so much more incisive and so much more meaningful for her when she went local. You know, she started off as an English language journalist writing at the national level. When she started writing in Canada for a Canada audience in a very specific geographic location, that's when her work and her life really clicked for her. And I think there's a lot of meaning there. You know, when we think about these political problems on a national level, they feel overwhelming. We feel impotent. We feel hopeless because we can't do anything about what's happening on the national level as individuals. Where we can make a difference and where the flame is kept alive during dark times is in local resistance and in local action. And Gauri really learned that lesson in her own work and really took that to heart. And I think, you know, that is the cure for cynicism, and that's where we can actually get things done. Look for things that you can do locally rather than only thinking about things on the national level.
And is there any action that you would like to recommend for making sure the impunity is lesser?
That's a good question. That's a tougher one. How to lessen impunity. I guess, you know, just in counteracting in every way that we can this narrative that journalists are there to be abused and are deserving of abuse. This narrative, you know, this environment where government officials actually garland and feed sweets to people who have attacked journalists needs to be counteracted with a robust defense of journalism at its best and the value that it has for everyone. You know, so often when autocrats make their moves, I've seen this happen so often in the US, when a freedom is attacked, when a minority is attacked, the opposition too often just retreats and doesn't stand up for that institution, for that minority. In fact, that is the moment to robustly defend and counterattack with a defense of the value of, in this case, journalism and journalists.
Your words, yeah.
I think no sacrifices will go vain. It will have its impact, and that we actually realized on September 12th, you know, in 2017, when thousands of people actually came on their own from different corners of the state, and the way she was actually, her martyrdom and her sacrifices were celebrated all over the world in that sense. That means that, in fact, Gauri became more popular after her death. Gauri lived more, in fact, after her death. So no sacrifices will go vain, and that gave a lot of spirit, lot of hope to many people. In fact, there is a great saying by Milan Kundera: "Memories fight against forgetfulness, is individuals fight against power." So we thought that we should institutionalize the memory of Gauri, and there is Gauri Memorial Trust, which is organizing 2 events in a year, on the day of her birth and also on the day that she was assassinated, especially September 5th and 6th, etc. That memory is very, very important. What Gauri lived for and how she actually fought her battles. This should be taken to the younger generation, because they have a romantic notion of everything. But even Gauri came from that background, and how she actually transformed. The transformation of an individual should be actually transferred to different generations. And this is a collective effort. No individual can fight this, can win this war. We all will win or we all will lose. So that collective effort against any individual's intimidation or any individual victimization, and the collective effort to safeguard the space, the independent media space like DigiPub, because one thing is to protect the journalist physically is one thing. We need protection. Protecting the media space, independent media space, is very, very important. The direct attack is happening on that. That needs a collective protest against that and collective way of fighting out that. And that collective effort should be, I think, thought over. That's what I think.
Lee, if I can come to you.
Yeah, I have never met Gauri, but based on, just hearing the three of you describe your memories of her, how she was, I'm so moved and so touched, honestly. So we must keep speaking about Gauri and her legacy. I think her work, her journalism, her bravery, and how she inspired journalists who keep on reporting today, despite all the challenges. I think that is very important. And obviously on impunity, stop killing journalists, stop silencing the truth, bring the perpetrators to accountability, and give Gauri's family full justice.
Give Gauri's family full justice. Thank you everyone for joining us. Rollo, Lee, we couldn't hear more from Asha. Hopefully next time. Thank you, Shivsundar. And I just want to tell everyone listening that on the 5th of September, as we remember Gauri Lankesh again on the day that she was killed, let's not forget what each person told us in this panel, that one thing that all of us can do is to keep speaking, is to keep questioning. It's something tiring. It's not something that people can do on a daily basis because we all have our lives to live. We all have things to do. But let's also keep some time aside to question, to support those people who deserve our support, and to question all sorts of impunity, and also demand that there should be a fast-track court which looks at not just Gauri's case, but a lot of cases which require immediate attention because they should not fade away from memory. They should not be suffering because of judicial non-cooperation. Thank you to CPJ for organizing this, and thank you to everyone who joined.